And thank goodness, he came to see my band, and he said to my dad, "The band stink, but the kid's got something going for him." And
Bon Jovi spent decades looking unstoppable from the outside. But behind the music, fame, and packed arenas, resentment and heartbreak had been quietly building for years. What started as one of rock's greatest partnerships slowly turned into silence, distance, and emotional scars that never fully healed. From Richie Sambora's shocking exit to accusations of betrayal and growing tension inside the group, the story behind Bon Jovi became far messier than fans ever realized. And now, Jon Bon Jovi is finally speaking more openly about the band members who hurt him most, and the fallout that changed everything forever. How Bon Jovi almost never happened. Before the world ever knew him as Jon Bon Jovi, he was simply John Francis Bon Jovi Jr., a kid growing up in Perth Amboy inside a family that already felt larger than life. His father, John Sr., was a barber and former Marine, while his mother, Carol, had also served in the Marines before later working as a florist, and, surprisingly, as a Playboy bunny. It was an unusual mix of discipline, glamour, and working-class grit that helped shape the future rock star's personality from the very beginning. John's roots stretched across several cultures. His father's side carried Italian and Slovak ancestry, with the Bon Jovi name tracing back to Sciacca, Sicily, while his mother's family came from German and Russian heritage. For years, rumors floated around claiming John was related to Frank Sinatra. John eventually addressed the story himself, admitting there was no blood relation, though he joked that anybody would be proud to claim a connection to Sinatra. Growing up in a Catholic household during the height of Beatlemania had a huge impact on him. John's mother became obsessed with the Beatles and dreamed that her son might one day reach the same kind of superstardom. Hoping to spark that future early, she bought him his very first guitar when he was only 7 years old and signed him up for lessons. There was just one problem. Young John hated every second of it. The lessons felt painfully boring to him, and eventually, frustration got the better of him. He tossed the guitar down into the basement and later joked that he enjoyed the sound of it crashing down the stairs more than anything he learned during those classes. At the time, music didn't seem like destiny, but that changed once he reached high school. John first attended St. Joseph High School before transferring to Sayreville War Memorial High School. And it was during those teenage years that everything suddenly came into focus. At just 15 years old, he went to see Bruce Springsteen perform live. Watching Springsteen command the stage flipped a switch in his head instantly. Right there in the crowd, John realized exactly what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. This time, when he picked the guitar back up, it was different. He began studying under a demanding teacher named Al Parinello, whose strict approach pushed John far beyond where he ever thought he could go. What once felt like a chore slowly turned into genuine passion. Years later, John would describe those lessons as one of the best things that ever happened to him. When Parinello passed away in 1995, John honored him by carving the initials AP into his acoustic guitar, a tribute he continued for years afterward. By 1974, the future rock icon was already trying to build his own path. Still just a kid, he formed his very first band, Raise, to compete in a school talent show. A few years later, at 16, he created another group called Atlantic City Expressway. That band became especially important because it introduced him to keyboardist David Bryan, who would eventually become a founding member of Bon Jovi. John kept grinding through the local New Jersey music scene throughout his teenage years. He performed in a band called Jon Bon Jovi and the Wild Ones, playing clubs like the Fast Lane and opening for established local acts whenever possible. By 1980, he formed his first fully original band, The Rest, which became strong enough to land opening slots for hometown legends like Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. It was during this period that Jon teamed up with guitarist Jack Ponte. Together, the two started writing original songs, including an early track called "Shot Through the Heart." Years later, fans would recognize that title from Bon Jovi's debut album. But back then, the song was simply part of a struggling young band trying desperately to get noticed. Despite their efforts, record labels showed little interest, and eventually Ponte grew frustrated enough to disband the group entirely. Ironically, Jon's very first professional break came from something nobody could have predicted: Star Wars. In 1980, he signed his first recording contract to sing on a quirky holiday album called Christmas in the Stars, produced by Mecco Monardo. Jon later shared the old contract online, revealing that he was paid just $180 for the session and waived any future royalties in the process. The album itself featured Anthony Daniels, the actor behind C-3PO, narrating and singing throughout the record. Jon's contribution came on a song hilariously titled R2-D2 We Wish You a Merry Christmas. Years later, during an appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live, Jon explained how random the opportunity really was. At the time, he worked as a gopher at a recording studio, running errands and doing whatever jobs were needed. One day, producer Mecco needed someone who could sound like a young boy singing on the album. Jon volunteered, stepped into the booth, and walked away with his first paycheck in music history. The funny part? He later remembered the payment being $183 instead of $180. Close enough. While Jon's music career slowly started taking shape, another life-changing relationship was forming at the exact same time. Back in 1980, while attending Sayreville War Memorial High School, Jon met Dorothea Hurley. From the moment he saw her, he was hooked. During a later interview on The Howard Stern Show, Dorothea admitted Jon was easily considered one of the cutest guys in school. But she initially avoided him because she had no interest in dating a rock musician. That changed once she actually watched him perform live. Seeing him on stage completely altered her opinion. For Jon, the connection was immediate and never faded. Still, there was one awkward complication. Dorothea happened to be dating Jon's best friend, Bobby. That teenage love triangle eventually inspired one of the earliest songs Jon ever wrote, Bobby's Girl. Once Bobby joined the Navy, Jon and Dorothea officially became a couple, and before long she was regularly showing up at his gigs, while he chased bigger dreams around New Jersey. Even their prom story felt like something out of a movie. By age 16, Jon was already deeply involved in the local music scene, performing with multiple bands and opening shows for bigger acts. So when prom night collided with a major concert opportunity for the rest, opening for Southside Johnny in front of thousands of people, Jon made his choice immediately. He skipped prom, and Dorothea skipped it too. After the concert ended, the two reportedly stopped at a diner and found themselves surrounded by classmates still dressed in tuxedos and prom gowns, while they walked in wearing jeans and t-shirts after performing for a massive crowd. For Jon, that moment confirmed he was already living the life he truly wanted. Still, success remained frustratingly out of reach. Throughout the early 1980s, Jon recorded countless demo tapes and mailed them to virtually every record label he could think of. One demo was even produced by rock star Billy Squier, yet nothing seemed to break through. Then, in 1982, everything finally changed. Jon headed into his cousin's recording studio and recorded a song called Runaway alongside a group of talented studio musicians. Around that same time, he began visiting New York radio station WDWB 103.5 FM, known as The Apple, where he helped write and perform jingles. While hanging around the station, Jon met DJ Chip Hobart and promotion director John Lessman, who encouraged him to submit Runaway for a local compilation album featuring unsigned artists. At first, Jon hesitated, but eventually, he handed over the newly re-recorded version of the song. The musicians backing him on the track were impressive even then. Guitarist Tim Pierce, drummer Frankie LaRocca, bassist Hugh McDonald, and keyboardist Roy Bittan from Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Once WAP started spinning Runaway, the response exploded. The song gained traction throughout the New York area before eventually spreading to radio stations in other major cities. Suddenly, Jon Bon Jovi needed a real band. In March 1983, he called David Bryan for help putting a touring lineup together. Bryan then recruited bassist Alec John Such and drummer Tico Torres, who had previously played together in a band called Phantom's Opera. The final missing piece turned out to be guitarist Richie Sambora. Sambora first heard about the project through Alec John Such and decided to audition. At the time, Richie and Jon were complete strangers, but the second they started playing together, the chemistry was undeniable. Richie later described the experience as pure magic, remembering how instantly charismatic Jon seemed from the moment they met. That connection would eventually become one of rock music's most iconic creative partnerships. As the group started performing showcases and opening local gigs, they finally caught the attention they'd been chasing for years. Record executive Derek Schulman signed them to Mercury Records, which operated under Polygram at the time. Now the band needed a real name. A woman named Pamela Maher, who worked with manager Doc McGee, suggested calling the band Bon Jovi, inspired by successful two-word rock names like Van Halen. Believe it or not, the alternative idea floating around at the time was Johnny Electric. At first, almost nobody loved the Bon Jovi name, but within just a couple of years, it would become one of the biggest brands in rock music. How fame tore them apart. By the mid-1980s, Jon Bon Jovi and Dorothea Hurley already seemed like the kind of couple destined to last forever. They had connected instantly back in high school, growing together while Jon chased his dream through tiny clubs and local gigs around New Jersey. But like a lot of young relationships suddenly thrown into fame and pressure, things eventually hit a rough patch. In 1985, the couple broke up. During that time apart, Jon briefly dated actress Diane Lane, who was already becoming a rising Hollywood star thanks to films like Streets of Fire and The Outsiders. Years later, while appearing on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen, Lane reflected warmly on the relationship, explaining that they dated for roughly 5 months when she was around 20 years old. Looking back, she described it as a genuinely positive experience and made it clear there was no bitterness between them. Still, the relationship didn't last long. Before long, Jon and Dorothea found their way back to each other, and timing could not have been more important. Right as they reunited, Bon Jovi's career exploded into another universe. In 1986, the band released Slippery When Wet, the album that transformed them from rising rock act into full-blown global superstars. Suddenly, songs like Livin' on a Prayer, You Give Love a Bad Name, and Wanted Dead or Alive were everywhere. The record became a cultural phenomenon, dominating radio stations, MTV, and arenas across the world. But behind all the success, the non-stop pace was starting to destroy them. The band launched into a massive world tour that seemed endless. Between 1986 and 1988, they spent around 18 brutal months on the road, moving from country to country with barely any time to breathe. By the end of it, Jon was physically wrecked and emotionally drained. Years later, reflecting on that period, he admitted he had pushed himself far beyond his limit. He remembered being exhausted, running on steroids, barely sleeping, and feeling completely hollowed out, while management continued stacking more tour dates onto the schedule. Australia, Europe, more concerts, more interviews. It just never stopped. At one point, he felt so broken down that all he wanted to do was disappear into bed and shut the world out completely. And the worst part was that once the tour finally ended, there still wasn't any rest waiting for them. Instead, the band immediately jumped back into the studio to record New Jersey, followed almost instantly by another world tour. The pressure became unbearable. Jon later revealed that during this stretch, he fell into one of the darkest periods of his entire life. Living out in California at the time, he admitted he was drinking heavily, miserable, and mentally unraveling. The fame that once felt exciting had started stripping away everything he originally loved about music. He became so overwhelmed that he even experienced moments where he thought about ending his own life. Looking back, he described himself as completely lost until he finally realized he needed to regain control over his life before the industry swallowed him whole. Ironically, while the outside world saw Bon Jovi as unstoppable, the band members themselves were slowly cracking under the pressure. Following the massive success of Slippery When Wet, the group initially felt closer than ever. Years of struggle had finally paid off, and guitarist Richie Sambora later explained that surviving both the highs and lows together created a powerful bond between them. But constant touring and media obligations eventually started tearing that bond apart. By 1989, the exhaustion had become impossible to ignore. The members were burned out, emotionally isolated, and barely speaking to one another. Jon later admitted that during those years, everybody became so consumed by their own personal struggles that nobody really knew how to help each other anymore. Even though the band always tried to function like a family, the non-stop pressure pushed everyone inward. At the same time, tabloids sensed trouble. The second Bon Jovi slowed down even slightly, rumors immediately started spreading that the band was headed toward a breakup. Stories began popping up everywhere, trying to create divisions between Jon and the rest of the group. But despite the tension, the band stayed committed to surviving the chaos instead of walking away from it. Looking back years later, Richie Sambora admitted things became dangerously unstable at times, but he was grateful they managed to make it through together. And right in the middle of all that madness, Jon made one of the biggest personal decisions of his life. In 1989, Bon Jovi was sitting at the absolute peak of rock superstardom, wrapping up a huge 3-night run at the legendary Los Angeles Forum. During that same weekend, Jon was staying at the famous St. James's Club Hotel on the Sunset Strip alongside Dorothea. One morning, he looked out the hotel window and saw a gigantic billboard featuring his own face staring back at him across Los Angeles. And suddenly, he had an idea. Without months of planning or some elaborate proposal, Jon turned to Dorothea and suggested they leave immediately and fly to Las Vegas to get married. At first, she thought he was completely out of his mind. But the more Jon talked about it, the more the moment just felt right. In his mind, there was no better time than right then, while they were young, deeply in love, and standing together in the middle of absolute chaos. So they did it. Jon Bon Jovi and Dorothea Hurley quietly eloped in Las Vegas. What felt romantic and spontaneous to them, however, sent shockwaves through the music industry. At the time, Jon Bon Jovi wasn't just a rock star, he was one of the biggest heartthrobs on the planet. To millions of fans, especially teenage girls, the image of him as the unattainable fantasy was a massive part of his appeal. Suddenly, seeing a wedding ring on his finger changed that image overnight. The backlash was immediate. His manager reportedly panicked. The record label wasn't thrilled either. Years later, Jon compared the reaction to what it would be like if modern superstars like Harry Styles or Justin Timberlake suddenly revealed they had secretly gotten married at the height of their fame. Industry executives genuinely worried the decision could destroy his career. But Jon never regretted it for a second. Looking back today, he still considers marrying Dorothea one of the smartest and most meaningful decisions he ever made. Jon Bon Jovi finally names the Bon Jovi band members. He hated. On April 2, 2013, everything changed for Jon Bon Jovi with a single text message. Right in the middle of the band's massive "Because We Can Tour," longtime guitarist Richie Sambora suddenly informed him that he would not be taking the stage that night because of a personal matter. The timing could not have been worse. Bon Jovi had already powered through 35 concerts, with more than 100 performances still waiting across the United States and Europe. Behind the scenes, panic immediately started setting in. Rumors spread fast, with many believing Sambora had been fired from the band. Jon Bon Jovi quickly stepped in to deny the speculation, trying to calm the growing storm surrounding the group. At the same time, Sambora attempted to reassure fans himself. Over on social media, he explained that he was okay, but needed to remain in Los Angeles to deal with personal issues. Still, uncertainty continued hanging over the band. And the truth was, Richie Sambora had been carrying an enormous amount of pain for years. Back in 2006, his marriage to actress Heather Locklear came to an end after 11 years together. The couple also shared a daughter, Ava, who would later become the center of Sambora's world. Then came another devastating blow when his father died from lung cancer. The emotional weight became overwhelming, and by 2007, Sambora entered rehab. A year later, his struggles continued when he was arrested for driving under the influence. For Jon Bon Jovi, watching all of this unfold was heartbreaking. The two men were far more than just bandmates. They had spent 3 decades side by side, writing songs, touring the world, and building one of the biggest rock bands on the planet together. Later addressing the situation publicly, Jon made it clear there had been no explosive fight or financial dispute behind the split. According to him, nobody expected Sambora to suddenly walk away in the middle of a tour. He insisted Richie was never fired. He simply stopped showing up. But even with the confusion and disappointment, the tour could not stop. The band still had arenas filled with fans waiting for them every night. So Jon Bon Jovi brought in guitarist Phil X to fill the empty spot on stage. What initially looked temporary soon became permanent, as Sambora's departure from the band was eventually made official. From that moment on, things between the former friends never fully recovered. Although some original members reunited occasionally over the years, Jon later admitted that he and Sambora no longer had much of a relationship at all. He explained that while there would always be love between them, Richie had been gone from the organization for more than a decade. Jon also hinted at the deeper personal battles Sambora had been facing at the time, including the emotional strain of single fatherhood and substance abuse struggles. According to Jon, there came a point where Phil X had to repeatedly step in because there was still a concert scheduled that night, no matter what was happening behind the scenes. Even when both men participated in the band's later documentary project, they reportedly never worked together directly. Jon revealed that Sambora was interviewed separately in London and that they had not spoken to each other in years. Eventually, more details surfaced about what was really happening during those final tour days. Sources close to Sambora described him as emotionally exhausted and simply not in a good place mentally. Tension inside the band had reportedly grown heavier as Richie struggled to balance fame, grief, divorce, addiction, and family responsibilities all at once. life inside Bon Jovi had become an endless cycle of airports, hotels, and concerts. According to insiders, the band had barely stopped moving for nearly 30 years straight. At some point, Sambora no longer had the emotional energy to keep going. More than anything, he wanted to be home with his daughter and finally take care of himself. Years later, Sambora reflected on the decision and admitted he had no regrets about leaving. He explained that it may not have been popular, but in his mind, there was almost no other choice. He needed to focus on rebuilding his personal life, and he realized his daughter needed him present. But there was another major factor that remained hidden for years. Right before his final Bon Jovi tour began, Sambora reportedly slipped in the shower and broke his shoulder. Jon Bon Jovi was apparently willing to cancel the entire tour because of the injury. But Sambora refused. Determined to keep going, he reportedly insisted he would simply wear the guitar on the opposite shoulder and push through the pain. That decision came with devastating consequences. To manage the injury, Sambora was prescribed oxycodone, a powerful opioid painkiller. Despite the physical pain, he still managed to perform through dozens of shows, while the tour generated around $100 million. But behind the scenes, the medication slowly pulled him into addiction. The dependency reportedly became so severe that the shaking and tremors he experienced eventually made him fear he had developed Parkinson's disease. By the time he finally stepped away from the band, Sambora felt an enormous sense of relief. For the first time in years, he could focus on ordinary moments, driving his daughter to school, picking her up afterward, and simply being a full-time father. People close to him said Ava had always been the most important thing in his life. Over time, Sambora also managed to maintain a strong friendship with Heather Locklear, despite their divorce. And despite how painfully things ended between him and Bon Jovi, Richie Sambora never completely closed the door on coming back. Around the band's 40th anniversary in 2023, he admitted that a reunion could still happen someday. After all, he and Jon Bon Jovi created songs together that became part of millions of people's lives. And in Richie's mind, that kind of history doesn't just disappear overnight. Then by late 2024, fans finally got a reason to believe something might actually be changing. Reports surfaced claiming Jon Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora had briefly reunited in Palm Beach, Florida, and the news instantly sent longtime fans into a frenzy. At first, the meeting reportedly felt warm and familiar, almost like old times. But according to insiders, the mood quickly shifted once business entered the conversation. Sources claimed Jon Bon Jovi told Sambora that if he ever returned to the band, things would not work the way they once had. Allegedly, Richie's old 25% share of the band's earnings would be reduced down to just 10%. For someone who had spent decades helping build Bon Jovi into one of the biggest rock bands in the world, the news reportedly hit hard. According to those close to Sambora, he walked away stunned, feeling deeply betrayed by the offer. To him, the drastic pay cut allegedly felt less like a business decision and more like a personal insult. But not everyone close to the situation agreed with that version of events. Another insider, this time from Bon Jovi's side, painted a very different picture. According to that source, Jon was simply content with the way the band currently operated and had no interest in reopening old wounds. Bringing Richie back, they claimed, would likely create more tension than harmony. The two men, once inseparable creative partners, had reportedly become complete opposites over the years, too different to successfully work together again. Then came another emotional chapter in early 2025. According to reports, Sambora made a genuine effort to reconnect. He allegedly arrived at Jon Bon Jovi's home in New Jersey, carrying a vintage guitar as a birthday gift, seemingly hoping to rebuild at least some part of their friendship. But the visit reportedly took an uncomfortable turn. Sources claimed Jon decided to show Richie an early screening of the Hulu documentary series Thank You, Good Night, The Bon Jovi Story. The series explored the band's rise, struggles, and decades-long legacy, but according to insiders close to Sambora, the documentary painted him in an unfairly negative light. The project reportedly included painful discussions about Sambora's battle with painkiller addiction, along with moments where drummer Tico Torres admitted he had feared for Richie's well-being during those difficult years. However, people close to Sambora argued that the documentary left out critical context. According to them, everyone around the band knew Richie had stepped away largely to focus on raising his daughter and protecting his personal life. They felt the series instead created the impression that the band had simply been waiting for him to recover and return. Those close to Sambora also defended his time in rehab, insisting he had often been sober during parts of that journey, and had even helped support others struggling around him. To them, walking away from one of the biggest rock bands in history was not weakness, it was survival. Still, insiders claimed the way the documentary handled his story left Sambora feeling deeply hurt and betrayed all over again. As the years passed, Jon Bon Jovi gradually became more open about the emotional scars left behind by Richie's departure. During an appearance on the Dumb Blonde podcast with Bunny Zoe, Jon reflected on their decades-long friendship and creative partnership with a mix of admiration and heartbreak. He described Sambora as an incredibly gifted musician, singer, collaborator, and friend, someone whose talent helped shape Bon Jovi's identity for decades. Jon also admitted he never personally viewed their relationship as competitive, despite years of public speculation suggesting otherwise. But underneath the praise, the pain still lingered. According to Jon, the hardest part was not simply that Richie left the band, it was the way he left. He explained that it took years before Sambora finally sat down again with him, Tico Torres, and David Bryan to properly address what had happened. Even after all that time, Jon still seemed emotionally wounded by the sudden exit. At the same time, he made it clear he never wanted to stop his bandmates from exploring their own identities outside of Bon Jovi. Jon believed outside experiences could strengthen the band creatively, but in Richie's case, things unfolded differently. Somewhere along the way, Sambora no longer wanted to simply be part of Bon Jovi anymore, and after more than a decade of trying to understand it, Jon appeared exhausted by the entire situation. He admitted there was no longer much point in assigning blame or trying to force answers that never fully came. Despite everything, though, Jon still spoke about Sambora with love. The heartbreak, according to him, never erased the friendship they once had. During later discussions surrounding the documentary, Jon also pushed back against the long-running rumor that Sambora left because of some explosive fight within the band. He insisted there had never been a major falling out between Richie and the rest of the group. Instead, Jon described a man struggling under the weight of anxiety, addiction, family pressures, and personal battles that became impossible to ignore. According to him, Sambora ultimately wanted a life closer to home and farther away from endless tours and life on the road. But Jon also emphasized something important. No matter how difficult life becomes, eventually the show still has to go on. Even so, he insisted there was never true hatred between them. For most of Bon Jovi's history, Richie Sambora had been his right-hand man, the guitarist he personally invited into the band all those years ago. And despite everything that happened afterward, Jon still considered himself fortunate that their paths crossed in the first place. Because in the end, even the most legendary partnerships sometimes drift apart, And eventually, life simply keeps moving forward.